Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing fine. We're going to talk about airplanes.
All right.
I used to deal with airplanes a whole lot. One time I had, a private pilot license. Don't fly much now, but flew a little bit in the Air Force, not as a pilot, but as a flight surgeon. So, but the story today is about an airplane that I once flew in, and they're reviving it. 60 years old, but they can't find anything better. They've been working for decades to replace the B-52. But the B-52 is the one they have to have because every time they try to replace one, it didn't work, sort of like the F-35. But we want to talk about this, but the thing that got my attention on this was the fact that why are we doing this? Are we being threatened? Is there a reason that we need a bomber that was developed in the 1950s? I mean, it just seems really weird. But I think that it conforms with the president's speeches that he made as a candidate. Rebuild. But this isn't exactly rebuilding. It's, well, I guess it is rebuilding old airplanes and updating them and making them so-called modernized, which is an impossibility. But I'm sure you saw this article, and I guess you were very pleased that our taxpayers would be supporting, that industrial complex called the military.
That's correct. And, that was General David Goldfein, who's the USA Air Force Chief of Staff. He was quoted in Defense One over the weekend saying that now we got to bring these B-52s back on ready alert. They need to be able to take off at a moment's notice with nuclear weapons. And he said just one more step in ensuring that we are prepared. So really it is back to the future. We have not had these planes on a moment's notice since 1991 when the Soviet Union broke up and the Cold War ended. So now we're going back to the future.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to read something that Goldfein said to sort of describe, what he was intending and what the policies should be. And the reason they're shifting, even though we haven't had these planes flying since 1991, now all of a sudden now we need them. But he has to describe, well, there's danger out there. And this is his description of the danger. I didn't realize that we're in such danger because sometimes we talk about the downside of our own policies, but he's talking about something else. So this is how he describes the danger and the reason why we have to get the B-52s flying again. The world is a dangerous place, and we've got folks out there talking openly about using nuclear weapons. And he said, it's no longer a bipolar world where it was just us and the Soviet Union. We've got other players out there who have nuclear capabilities. It's never been more important to make sure that we get this mission straight. And I'm just wondering, where's the dramatic change? The only dramatic change, the most important dramatic change that I've noticed in my lifetime was the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and evidently others agreed with that because in 1991 we quit flying these things. We weren't on this alert, and this raises the question: how much danger is out there, and how appropriate is us to be determined that we continue with the triad? That's more or less what they're dealing with. Not that we don't have other weapons to defend ourselves if we were attacked, but it's sort of the old idea of a triad.
Yeah, that we need to have these planes. And I think the short answer is this whole trumped up, to use a phrase, threat of North Korea. And that's not to say that they're cuddly kitties. But the fact of the matter is we cannot discount the idea that the U.S. has been extraordinarily hostile toward North Korea. We're having military drills right on their border. We're flying nuclear-capable bombers over there, in their vicinity. We are the ones provoking. The U.S. is the ones provoking. And then when they react to the provocation, we say, oh, look, we've got to do something. Look how terrible they are. Well, maybe we shouldn't be in their neighborhood.
How pilots respond to airplanes are important. And a lot of the pilots that have flown the B-52 sort of like it, and they're sentimental about it. But they also, many pilots say, "What are we doing this for?" This is old history. But it's called a Stratofortress, and it's a big airplane. We just saw the pictures of it. But the pilots called it BUFF, and that stood for Big, Ugly, Fat fellow. And it wasn't exactly complimentary. And it is a big plane. When I was in the Air Force and stationed at Kelly in San Antonio, there was a unit there that worked on them, repairs and maintenance there. And that was the reason that I was in one, because I was supposed to fly in the planes that the people on that base were flying. But it was the worst ride I ever had. Flying a small fighter jet or a training plane, I got a little excitement about that. But this was terrible, because I was in the radar maintenance seat, and it was back in the fuselage. You had to crawl through a tunnel and no windows, so it wasn't a good ride. And I had to be up there for 4 hours, so I didn't have a good experience with the B-52. But we also, on one of our trips, we landed at Guam and saw a lot of B-52s, and they had just started, because they were taking off from Guam to fly all the way to Vietnam and did all those bombings. But it was just accelerating at that time. But there were a lot of B-52s there. I guess maybe Guam is going to benefit from all this, because one of these people that they're threatened by is the non-nuclear weapons that North Korea has. So, but it's not the Soviet Union anymore. But those Ruskies, those Russians, you got to watch about them, because they talk about it. But our country, we wouldn't dare hint about our retaliation or our, willingness, nothing being off the table, and you know what that infers.
It seems like irony is dead, because you're here, you got the Chief of Staff of the Air Force saying, well, there are people out there talking about using nuclear weapons. So that's what our administration does on a daily basis. But it's not only Guam that will benefit. This is, as you inferred when we first started, this is a big boost to the military-industrial complex. There's no way around it. Barksdale Air Force Base is being completely refurbished, so that they've been using the B-52s continuously. But this is new. This is a ready alert. They are ready to go at a moment's notice with nuclear weapons, and that requires not only refurbishing the launch pads, but they're building a 100-bed facility. They're upgrading their recreational facilities, and my guess is it won't just be Barksdale, but there'll be other bases that need to be upgraded now. So you're going to see a lot of money being spent on this, as we point out, weapons in search of a war.
And if it's a effort, they tried to replace the B-52. They weren't able to do that, so it's back to this repairing and all. But they went through a series, and they were all failures. But I remember one from the congressional office. This was before you were in the office, and it was during when Reagan was president in the early '80s, and he wanted a new bomber, and so there was an effort to build one, and they built the B-1 bomber, and the B-1 bomber was a big deal. It was a big political deal, and Reagan was super for this, called and asked for my vote, and it was a vote. I said, I'm sorry, because I campaigned on the effort that I didn't think we needed the B-1 bomber. And that was not a very, Reagan was a delightful gentleman. When I told him I just couldn't do it, it was almost like he respected my position. But nevertheless, I voted against it. They built the plane. It came out in 1985, and I think that was the one where they had 30,000 people to view it, and they put it out on the runway. It wouldn't start. So, but many years later, our friend Lou Rockwell was at a conservative meeting in Washington, D.C., who were furious with me. So when they met Lou, they said, yeah, we don't like that Ron Paul. He wouldn't even vote for the B-1 bomber. And Lou looked at me and said, yeah, but he was right about the B-1 bomber. He said, yeah, but he couldn't have known it back then. But of course, it was the lack of need for another bomber that influenced me as much as predicting exactly what would happen.
Exactly, and it's not just the bombers being put back on ready notice, but it's also the issue of pilots. We didn't realize that there is a severe pilot shortage. Is that right? Yeah,
that's right. Right now, I hope there's not a shortage of flight surgeons because they're calling up 1,000 pilots. Now, I don't know. I guess when they're an officer, maybe they have it in their contract that they can be called up at any time. But in a way, what if they've been out for 10, 15 years? And what if they have a good job with an airlines and they get called back? That comes pretty close to a draft. But even the Secretary of the Air Force is saying that we need a lot more. We need over 1,500 pilots in the Air Force. But what war are they going to fight? Where is the enemy? And bombs bombers and fighter jets, and they're so archaic in this age where you have lasers and computers and all kind of electronic things and drones, and they're talking about manned bombers. It has to be strictly the money behind it that drives this.
The pilot thing is interesting because what happened is President Trump recently signed an executive order modifying an executive order that President Bush signed right after the 9/11 attacks. Bush's executive order said that the Air Force could recall to duty a maximum of 25 retired pilots. That was the 9/11. And so Trump just sent an order basically saying that we can recall actually up to 100 retired U.S. Air Force pilots. Just overrode it with another executive order.
Yeah, but they're talking about 1,000.
Yeah, 1,000. Yeah, they got rid of the limit of 25 and said, no, the sky's the limit.
But it sounds like there's no limit. You'd think they would maybe be checking a little bit with the Congress on this, but the Commander-in-Chief, at the present time, it's considered that the Commander-in-Chief can, move the troops around the world in Niger. What we have. And even the senators on the committee had no idea there were that many people there until 4 people get killed. That still was irrelevant until it became, a case of, a case out of control about, racial things coming up and turn it into a big story. Otherwise, we wouldn't know anything about that. And the people, I think it was Graham.
Lindsey Graham.
Yes, on the committee, he didn't even know we had 1,000 troops there. But how many other countries? This is why we have our maps. I always like to put up a map. Just remember that map we had the other day of Africa. 17 countries that we're in, and who knows? And they missed. And we even recognize they missed a few. So we're all over the place. That's where the problem is. It isn't the problem that we don't have enough pilots and that we don't have enough B-52s flying around. That must be. It must be one of the easiest planes ever to shoot out of the sky, and it's sort of like shooting at an aircraft carrier. An aircraft carrier must be an easy target if you have modern-day warfare.
Yeah, it must be, and it does. It is. It's weapons in search of a war. 1,000 troops in Niger, including. They said they're there to bring democracy to the country. And I noticed that one of the service members killed was a WMD expert, which is sort of interesting. But General Goldfein said he's asking his force to think about new ways that nuclear weapons can be used as a deterrent or even in combat. So in his own sentence, he's saying that we're the ones talking about using them.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate because I think before they were used in a bold manner in Vietnam, people worried about having a really neat airplane and never having tested it. So sometimes they test airplanes, but nothing like testing them in real combat, and they were eager to do that. And the one thing they're talking about on strategy now is it's going to be more targeted, laser targeting, none of this carpet bombing because that was too destructive and too much collateral damage. So this time we're going to be more humane and target these weapons and not have carpet bombing anymore. So it's a shame because they will feel compelled to use weapons when they have them. But I think that you can expect, because it's a government bureaucracy totally out of control. And when I was reading up on this, I couldn't believe how many times they have accepted plans to have a replacement, and they have not in these 6 years been able to really replace the B-52. So now, well, we've got to build up our forces. We'll renew these. We still have 76 of them. I understand. One time I had built 740, so there are a lot of them out there. But just think about the mechanics. You're going to 24-hour duty. For these planes, you're going to need a lot more mechanics. Not only pilots, you need the mechanics, and it'll cost a few dollars, but we'll all be safe.
Yeah, and you also need the command planes. They're going to be making much more active rounds and landing in the air bases in Barksdale and elsewhere. So you're not talking about just sprucing up a few paints, a couple of coats of paint on some military barracks. You're talking about a significant increase in expenditure.
Yeah, this was originally meant to be able to fly low. Nobody expected to be fast. The stealth bomber and stealth planes, if you're looking for technology, it has to be, but they've never been able to replace it with a stealth a bomber. So therefore, it is and will always be vulnerable. But I don't imagine there'll be much criticism in the Congress. You know, it'll be bipartisan, and like I was kidding, but it's probably correct. I imagine that a lot of bases will be reopened or refurbished, and these repairs will be done probably in many different states, just like how they build the F-35. You have to use different states to incorporate maybe a different company than just Boeing, and everybody gets a piece of the action, which is a shame because I do not see this moving us toward peace in any way whatsoever. To have a strong defense and let everybody know that, if we're attacked, we would respond. I don't think this has anything to do with this. You talk about letting your enemy know where we are, and we're going to put the B-52 up in the air. I would say that's letting the enemy know where we are. If we're worried about somebody sending an intercontinental missile thousands of miles to hit us here, and we're going to confront them with a World War II B-52, this is pretty amazing.
But you know how they're going to get Congress to go along. They're only going to have to use one word: readiness.
There you
so
go.
All they have to do is couch it in that term. Hey, this is all about readiness. There's not a single member or senator that's going to vote against readiness. So
there was one pilot that equated this to a biplane. Us using these planes in this modern day warfare, it would have been equivalent to us using a biplane when we were bombing Iraq. A World War I biplane. But so we're still fighting the last war, and a war doesn't exist. We're looking for an enemy. We're looking for a fight, and to justify what they're doing. That first statement I read, that's what they're trying to find the excuse. It was, I thought, a pretty flimsy excuse. It wasn't like the enemy's on our borders, and it wasn't quite like the missiles being in Cuba. I think that was a little bit more authentic, but that doesn't exist today.
Yeah. Well, my final thoughts are simply that we are desperately looking for opposition to this new militarism. It is extreme militarism we've not seen in ages, really, maybe since 9/11. But what has happened to the opposition? We once had opposition to President Bush's policies. A lot of the people on the left, the majority of the left was with us, fighting against, and now they're perfectly happy to even go along and praise Bush as long as Bush is attacking Trump. But they're not attacking him for this militarism. They're attacking him because he's supposedly a tool of Russia, because he has orange skin, all of these insane, stupid things. We need a real opposition to this war that we're facing that's coming very, very fast.
Boy, I can agree with that for sure. And the other day when all the former presidents got together, it never dawned on most of the former presidents that were talking, and all criticizing Bush, of course. They weren't criticizing him for the right reason. They were criticizing him because he was challenging the status quo and the deep state, except for one. Our former president, Jimmy Carter, made sense about foreign policy, his willingness to be an emissary and go to North Korea, and talking about the roads to peace. But unfortunately, they're not going to listen to him. But more people should pay attention. Yes, you can point out, and I did before, point out his shortcomings. He probably would be willing to admit some of his shortcomings, but he's also one of the very few with stature to start talking about a more sensible foreign policy, and I congratulate him for that. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.